KURV. He is with Americans for Prosperity, and he actually was able to testify and talk about AI and how some of this recent legislation is not going to work out so well, in his opinion. Joining us on 710 KURV is James Czerniawski. We've had him on the show before. Welcome back to the program, by the way. So let's talk about what the Senate proposed and what you were advocating against.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be back with you guys. So we submitted written testimony to the Senate Rules Committee because last week they were considering three different bills concerning AI and elections. Obviously, as we get closer and closer to the election here in November, there's a lot of concerns about AI getting used to generate deep fakes and the impact that that could have on an election. Unfortunately, the proposals that Senator Klobuchar was leading would do very little to go and tackle that particular issue while simultaneously undermining the technology and the free speech rights of countless Americans in the process. So we wrote in our written testimony to the Senate Rules Committee advocating against pushing out these different proposals for highlighting these various reasons. You can't just go and sit there and say that you're worried about deep fakes and then use that as a justification to go and put all kinds of restrictions, not just on the technology, but then on political advertising, issue advocacy, and even broader content creators and individuals on the internet that might use AI to create an image of an elected candidate or someone who's running for office that they simply do not like. So it was for those kinds of reasons that we submitted written testimony expressing our concerns with these different pieces of legislation they were moving forward with.
This has been, well, this isn't the, well, I want to compare AI to like when Photoshop first came out, and we talk about deep fakes and, people making people look like they're not in the situation that they're in and just coming up with these false generated scenarios. Is there, do you feel like there's a huge difference in the concept? Do you think that AI is that far removed from the capabilities of, say, what Photoshop might do, even though now Photoshop is getting integrated with AI? But that's besides the point. You get what I'm saying. Are there huge differences here?
No, not at all. And that's kind of the exact point. You use the exact examples that we talked to when we were mentioning to the committee in and of itself. Photoshop does leverage artificial intelligence to power some of its editing software, right? That certainly is in the newer versions, but it's also been around for a long period of time. And internally, for business-to-business purposes, like you think about sports, Texas is a big sports town, Dallas Cowboys, right? They use advanced sports analytics all the time to go and look at this, but that's all powered and informed by artificial intelligence. The only reason why it's become so popular in the last year and a half, year and change, is because now the technology has gotten to a point where it can interact with the consumer in a different way. So being able to have like that chat bot where it can go and offer a lot more than your basic customer service stuff is something that's different. But again, fundamentally, no, there's not all that much different between what artificial intelligence generates versus what Photoshop can go and generate. And if anything, the Photoshop stuff can be even more realistic because we're talking about editing existing photos to go and do certain kinds of things here. With artificial intelligence, sometimes you can go and put in a prompt to generate an image of an elected candidate, and it's not going to necessarily use an existing image. It might just go and come up with something that looks just a little bit off, a little more cartoonish or something. So it's pretty clear that it's not like real or authentic, and people are very, very acutely aware of this and keeping their eyes out for precisely this kind of stuff. So this is really a solution that's in search of the problem here. And it really begs the question of whether or not this entire, exercise was even necessary.
Joining us on 710 KURV is James Czerniawski from Americans for Prosperity and Young Voices, our guest in your 956 drive home, and he sent in written testimony against some of this legislation on AI. And I know there's people listening that are probably going to be sending this out as a question. So say, we get closer to November and there's a political campaign ad that comes out, something like, can you imagine if Trump were elected, he would say something like, okay, let's line them all up and put them in the camps. Let's go. Don't vote for Trump in November. Like the whole AI thing, the generated video, et cetera, et cetera. Should there be at least hey, some of this was generated with AI, some sort of disclaimer or anything like that?
Yeah, and again, when we're talking about political ads, that falls underneath a different kind of scrutiny because there is an interest that the Supreme Court has found when it comes to political ads that concerns wanting to go and combat corruption or the appearance of corruption, as well as voters being able to know, who's paying for advertisements that might be influencing their candidates. Those are the two narrow exceptions that SCOTUS has typically gone and, found that there is an exception to the First Amendment kind of standard that's otherwise there. And to the example that you're describing, it's not necessarily unfathomable to think that somebody might try to do that, but there are existing tools that are at your disposal, as well as state laws that govern elections in this space. Actually, in the state of Texas, they just outright, I believe, if memory serves right, banned the ability to use AI in the political advertising altogether. So, again, it's a state-by-state issue, and is it something that could happen? Absolutely. But the good news is that, again, when these instances have popped up in limited circumstances, so think about like the Joe Biden phone call in New Hampshire where somebody generated a voice of Joe Biden calling primary voters, telling them not to vote in the upcoming primary later that week. We figured out that it was pretty much artificially intelligence generated within 24 hours. We found the source within 3 weeks, and we had a solution from the FCC that basically said guardrails around what to expect with this kind of stuff looking forward. So the system actually works, and it's doing a better job than Congress will possibly be able to do. With these legislative proposals, the issue ended up being that it was going well beyond just looking at AI and political ads explicitly, despite what Senator Klobuchar would like people to believe. So that's, I think, what is the key issue here.
Anything obscured that hasn't really been fleshed out yet that you would like to mention? Something that not a whole lot of people would know concerning some of this AI legislation that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue was that the way that they were defining AI was so broad that it would have captured your Photoshop example that you mentioned before. But then what was more alarming was that it enabled a private right of action by the candidates to go and sue to get the content taken down for any artificial intelligence generated imagery or vocals of them that's present online, right? Now, that goes and extends beyond the political advertising context to also then include content creators and other kinds of people online. So you could go and share a funny, artificial intelligence generated meme of a candidate, and in theory, under this legislation, they'd be empowered to go and sue to get that taken down. So you're basically empowering a regime that has politicians sue first and ask questions later. And that's just contrary to our democratic process. And I think the last thing that you want to do, which is what these proposals were doing, which is really bad, was converting the Federal Election Commission into becoming the judge, jury, and executioner of determining whether or not something was truthful in the political context. So that, I think, is something that was really bad, and that's why we went and submitted that written testimony. Thankfully, I think Republicans were smart and realized some of these glaring issues that were there, so no Republicans joined the Democrats in voting out those particular proposals. And, we'll continue doing the work that we can to make sure that the federal government does not go and put its thumb on the scale in terms of impacting American speech rights here.
Hey, James, thanks a lot for spending some time with us this afternoon. That's James Czerniawski at he's a policy expert at Americans for Prosperity and Young Voices, joining us on News Talk 710 KURV.